Hello, everybody. Happy 2021, hopefully. Welcome to EDUC 7616, Bilingual Literacy and Literature. I'm glad you've decided to continue with this class. We're a big group comprised of people from districts including Boston, Lynn, Milford, Worcester, Salem. So it's a big group of bilingual educators, and I'm happy you're all here, and I'm looking forward to this work that we're going to do. And the point of this introductory video is to just give you an overview of the class. We'll be doing face-to-face meetings where we can, ask and answer other questions, but the point of this right now is to just give you a sense of what you've gotten yourself into and what you're going to expect for the next 3 or 3.5 months up until April break. So I'm going to just start off with a PowerPoint that'll take you through. So I'm going to share my screen with you and start this. So this is our course introduction and overview. Bilingual Literacy and Literature, welcome back. We're in difficult times, as we all know. Many of you are teaching remotely, some of you hybrid. No matter what you're doing, thank you for all of it. It's difficult, and I think can be super rewarding work, but there's no question that it is extremely difficult. So I've said in our previous meetings, and I will continue to say it, that I appreciate everything y'all are doing. There's lots of things to teach and discuss beyond the curricula that we're implementing. Right? There's insurrection now. How do we talk to our students about that? Do they have questions? We have COVID and epidemiological issues in terms of spread and containment of this virus. We have social movements, particularly Black Lives Matter, which is not unrelated to insurrections having occurred very recently in this country. And so asking about how children and youth make sense of all this, it has to be part of the way we think about literacy instruction, because the way kids are going to make sense of it arguably can be through reading, writing, listening, speaking, and generally communicating with each other. So I want to keep that context, stay close to that context. Many of the readings and videos that are in this class pertain to these issues. So I just want to keep us close to that, particularly in our face-to-face meetings and as you meet in your groups. With respect to this class, pace yourself and communicate me throughout, and with each other, communicate. Your timing can be flexible if necessary, but there are dates associated with these modules, which is different from the previous one, and I'll explain why once we get into the class. But first, to start, I'm recording this on Monday, Martin Luther King Day. And I just wanted to take a minute and not talk about one of Dr. King's speeches, but actually talk about an elementary school that was named after him in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that actually sued the Ann Arbor Public Schools. And folks might remember from the foundations class, we talked about the Oakland Ebonics case, and that was in the 1980s. But prior to the Oakland Ebonics case, there was the Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School children versus the Ann Arbor Public Schools. And the children from the schools in Ann Arbor, who were largely Black and Black English speaking, sued the school district, arguing that particularly their reading instruction did not take their home language, Black English, into account, and thus created a language barrier that put them at greater risk for reading failure. And then the court case, they argued, finally, it's clear that Black children who succeed, and many do, learn to be bilingual. They retain fluency in Black English to maintain status in the community, and they become fluent in Standard English to succeed in the general society. They achieve in this way by learning to code switch from one to the other, depending on circumstances. So it's very interesting that they are here as early as 1979 articulating Black English as a language that is spoken that is distinctive from Standard English. One of the readings in Module 1 is from June Jordan, an influential essayist, Black woman poet who writes an essay called White English, Black English, and talks about exactly this. She wrote that in 1972. But this case was brought as a bilingual issue using Black English. And the court found that a language barrier did in fact exist because instruction was not taking into account the home language systems that kids were bringing to school, and thus sort of relegating those home languages as seen as deficient or inferior. And standard English being the goal of schooling and reading instruction. So, as early as 1979, we have court cases showing that language is fluid and instruction has to take into account that language fluidity. And I thought, this was sort of an appropriate case to bring up on this day, and thinking about issues of race and racism, as Dr. King did talk about, and also issues of capitalism and militarism, all of which, again, continue to be sort of part of our current reality, alongside these issues of language and how language gets codified into status. So that really is sort of a bedrock for thinking about this class. And so what are you going to do about instruction that takes into account linguistic fluidity? And that's the point of the class. So now back to the bilingual education certificate. I've said this before, this sequence of work consists of basically 4 classes. The first 2, everyone who's doing this class now has done, Foundations and the bilingualism class. Most of you will have finished that bilingualism class very recently, as of December of 2020. And those 2 classes comprise the foundations and the theory part of the bilingual ed certificate, which are part of the subject matter knowledge requirements set forth by the state. Now we're in bilingual literacy and literature, and that is getting at praxis, this idea of bringing theory into practice for the purposes of changing teaching, the way we teach, or going deeper into ways we teach that align with theory and practice. Some of you have already taken the narrative expository report writing class with Dr. Brisk. Others of you will take that later. Either way, those 2 classes can happen one or the other. The order is not as important. So for this class, for this praxis class, I thought about this in terms of the theory that we were dealing with in the foundations and the bilingualism classes as a way to enter into thinking about instruction. And so I showed folks this at the end of the last class, last December. If you think about the bilingualism class and the foundations class, maybe there's 4 broad areas that arose: identity and language use and language development, components of language and metalinguistic awareness, academic language, bilingualism, and translanguaging, so this idea of using language for schooling purposes, and finally, language development and special education. So these 4 sort of are all intersecting in various different ways, and they're all taking place in specific historical and political contexts. And those can be national, those can be state, those can be regional, and they can be local to your school districts. And everyone has done a really great job sort of reflecting on these different sort of localities of history and politics relative to these components of theory and research and bilingualism. So now the idea is to draw on that foundation and theory with 2 main goals. One is praxis. So again, that's sort of reflecting on theory and practice and planning for action to change teaching. And that's coming straight out of Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. That term comes from that body of work. The second goal, and related to the first goal, is one of self-reflection for you as individual educators, to reflect on language and language use, its development, and how your specific context and your identities and ideologies shape. So, structure of the course, there's going to be 5 modules. There's an introductory module. There will be 3, really 4 inquiry into practice modules. The last one of those is a summary module. In the inquiry into practice focus of the course is structured around 5 broad principles of multilingual literacy instruction. And I'll explain where those come from in a minute. But the first one is to explore ideological clarity. So that's sort of the surround, right? And so if you look at the arrow there, there's like self-understanding through narrative inquiry. So the idea is to sort of produce narratives, telling the stories of how you're thinking about your teaching, what you're doing, and the way your identities and ideologies interact with that teaching. So that should come into the narratives that you produce in your small groups to inquire into your instruction. And then the other 4 are actual instructional principles. So of those, number 2 there is focus on language and metalinguistic awareness. Another is use a dialogic approach to engaging students, so getting kids to talk. The 4th one is grounding instruction in multimodal texts and scaffolds. So not just print-based text, but how do we expand into digital realms and different ways of allowing kids to express what they know and what they understand, and different ways for them to take in new knowledge. And finally, embracing multilingualism. This is one that I know that many of your districts are familiar with. All 4 of these get to this idea of subjective educational theory through inquiring into practice. So that's the key part, inquiring into practice. The goal of this class is to just teach as you're teaching, and to use some of the readings and some of the ideas that are in the modules to sort of help think through the kinds of teaching that you're doing, or even to sort of as a scaffold to plan for instruction. So the proposed instructional foundation, again, there's 4 principles: focus on language and metalinguistic awareness, dialogic approach to engaging students, ground instruction in multimodal text and scaffolds, and embracing multilingualism. I'll give you 1 second there to read through those descriptions. Okay. Or choose some other principle. If you don't like any of those, I'm not wedded to these. These have come from work that I've researched and practice that I've done with teachers and with kids over many years in multilingual contexts. But if you don't like them, that's fine. You can choose your own instructional adventure and draw on the resources provided in the module, sort of articulate your own set of instructional principles. And so if you want to do that, that's fine. When you do the activities for each of the modules, just sort of name the instructional principle that you're pursuing, why, talk about it through narrative, how your identity is wrapped up in it. That's one way. Or possibly you don't want to focus on all 4 of these principles. Rather, you'd like to focus on 1 or 2 in more depth. That, of course, is a possibility as well. However you want to structure this, individually or in your groups, is up for discussion and is okay, as long as we're thinking about this idea of praxis and the idea of sort of ideology and identity as intersecting with praxis. Inquiring into practice, this is the model that that I'm trying to draw on. It's kind of a complicated model, but really it's not. If you zero in on the very center of it, that circle, and you see the arrows around it, ERA, that just means experience, reflection, action. That is, teach, reflect on your teaching, and then what are you going to do about it, about your teaching based on those reflections? What's the action? And so in that model, it's sort of an iterative cycle where you deliver instruction, you think about how are you assessing student learning, you're analyzing your own teaching and students' learning, and that analysis informs your planning decisions going forward. And then around all of that are a set of sort of broader things to be thinking about, significant work for all students within learning communities, building on what kids bring to school, teaching skills, bridging gaps, and bridging actually can take on another meaning there, like in the bilingual sense. Working with families and communities, so bringing those knowledges into the classroom. really diversifying and thinking about assessment. We've talked a lot about assessment and the foundations in the bilingualism class. So what is assessment and how does it tell you anything? And then thinking about activism, power, and inequity, like how are you dealing with those things as part of your instruction? Lots of you have sort of been listening a little bit to Jose Medina, who's been talking a lot about those kinds of issues as well. So in the modules, first of all, the modules are set up around these principles like we talked about. Secondly, there are some instructional videos in there, and I just want to tell you where both those things are coming from, the principles and the videos. A 4-year federally funded study, we call it CLAVES, which currently stands for Cultivating Linguistic Awareness for Voice and Equity in Schools. And so the focus of CLAVES is it is a curriculum that was designed around those 4 principles and implemented by teachers in 4th and 5th grades with Portuguese and Spanish English bilingual kids. And it was shown to be an effective way to teach kids, particularly around language development and reading comprehension. And so there's much more about the CLAVES project in those modules, including an introductory video, some examples of instruction from when we were implementing with teachers. But broadly, it's focusing on language. If you look in the bottom left there, semantics, syntax, and morphology, these language constructs occurring in naturalistic contexts, thinking about spoken and written language, students buy in multilingualism using representative texts, having kids talk about language, how language works, and having discussions about big ideas in texts. That's sort of the broad foundation, but from that foundation come those 4 principles. So in summary, for this class, group work remains ideal, and let me know when your group has changed or whether it'll stay the same. Below that right there are the meeting times for the face-to-face meetings. So Worcester and Milford, Tuesdays again, this time from 3:30 to 5 on January 26, February 9, March 9, March 30th, and April 13. Boston and Salem, Wednesdays from 4:30 to 6 on January 27, February 10, March 10, March 31, and April 14. These are the Tuesday and Wednesday before the module activity is due. So it's a chance for you to come to the face-to-face group to talk about the readings, to talk about what you're doing instructionally, and to what you're thinking about uploading to the course for that particular module. So there'll be 5 of them. They'll last for 90 minutes, a little bit shorter, and again, they're optional. Try to attend one, but I'm not going to be taking attendance. And again, the activities for the modules have due dates to align with the face-to-face meetings. So now I just want to quickly show you the course site and the topics and the expectations. So I'm going to stop this share, and I'm going to start this share, which is the course website. This is what it'll look like for you all. Bilingual Literacy and Literature, nice picture, a little description up here at the top. Again, the structure is exactly the same as it was with the previous classes, where you've got your modules down here on the left and the different sort of components of that module. So with module 1, this is really just again, the video that I'm recording right now will go right here. This is just an introduction to the class, but the idea with the readings and resources is to get an overview of where this class is coming from. So you'll see there's a land acknowledgement, an update on We Still Live Here, the movie. But this idea of bilingual teacher professional development, these are 4 articles that have been influential for me in thinking about the development of these courses. So if you sort of want to get a sense where things are coming from, any of these articles can give you a sense of that. Then in terms of introduction, literacy and bilingualism, thinking about Haitian Creole, thinking about Vietnamese, thinking about cautionary notes in dual language, and this idea of undoing appropriateness by Flores and Rosa has a lot to do with the language that we use in school and what's expected of children versus what they're capable of producing. And finally, there's a YouTube video sort of with the overview of the CLAVES curriculum if people want to get a sense of that, and the article that we just published showing its effectiveness. So this is Module 1. The activity for Module 1 is to discuss some of your early literacy memories. So working in your group, talk about what do you remember about learning to read or about learning to write. It doesn't have to be from when you're 5 or 6. It can be from when you're 14 or 15 or any time in there, but thinking about what do you remember about your own literacy development, and why is that salient, and how is it related to your identities? And then you can see the rubric here. Then moving forward from there, planning for inquiry. What are some of the main points raised here that you'll come back to as you inquire into your bilingual practice? So trying to think about, how your own learning experiences, your own literacy experiences relate to what you do now. And finally, linking to any readings. Again, readings are not required. They are there for you to pull. I would like for folks to read at least one, but I tried to give a little description of each reading in the module so that you can decide sort of what looks interesting to you as a group. You can jigsaw and do a bunch and discuss them, or you could all read one and go deeper, however you want to do that. But the reading should in some way inform the uploads that you're doing for the class. So Module 2, then we move into the principles. So the overview will simply state the principle, focus on language and metalinguistic awareness, give a little description here, and then moving on, there will be a set of different types of resources. For this one, there's 2 lectures on first and second language acquisition that were not in the bilingualism class that you're welcome to look at for review. There's a great talk between Sarah Atau and Dalila Mendoza about how teaching for metalinguistic awareness can actually be infused into respecting and uplifting students' identities. Then there are some practice articles from books you may be familiar with. And then there's some research articles for you to think about sort of, well, what's the research base from where all of these recommendations for focusing on metalinguistic awareness come from. And then finally, an instructional example of a former student of mine, Marcela, teaching from a trans-language perspective, teaching specifically morphology, so trying to develop kids' metalinguistic awareness by using translinguistic instructional approaches. It's really nicely done. This is data from her dissertation. So Module 2, then we get into the inquiry into practice. This is the submission. And really it's just a reflection. So between uploading this, which is due February 12th, folks should have chosen a lesson or some specific duration that addresses this module topic, metalinguistic awareness, and describe what you did. You can, and every one of a group can do it, or a single member of a group can do it and come to the group to describe it and discuss it. However you want to do that is fine. And again, I'm open to consultation for this. But come together to discuss your individual implementations and provide feedback. And for your upload, provide a summary document or discussion of the different implementations that you tried and did. Comment on what you learned, what you do different, and how the resources from the previous page informed your instruction. And so again, you can see the inquiry stands for social justice there to sort of guide you through that process. The rubric is aligned with the figure. This is the focus for modules 2, 3, and 4. The assignment is exactly the same. The principle just changes. So with principle 2, module 3, dialogic teaching, use a dialogic approach to engage students. This will be discussed and described. Then again, with this one, there's a PowerPoint that will be coming soon. Some linguistic perspectives on Black and White English, on academic language, practice articles on doing, being bilingual, and small group discussions, and then research articles that again sort of give the foundation for where these practice recommendations are coming from. And then Izzy is a teacher in our Claves program who is particularly good at small group discussions. So here's an example of her being very good at leading a small group discussion. Then again, inquiry into practice. Module 4 is multimodal texts and scaffolds. So trying to ground instruction in those, but also different ways of presenting information some TED Talks by Adichie, The Danger of a Single Story, Grace Lin. There's a short film called Immersion that some of you may or may not have seen, but it's outstanding, very insightful, very thoughtful, and makes you think. And then some practice articles, sort of linking to practice. And finally, a set of writing lesson plans and graphic organizers from the Claves project that are related to Izzy's video from the previous module, just for you to take a look at and think about. Then inquiry into practice, and the last module is embracing multilingualism and thinking about how to do that. And the resources, of course, structure around that. So there's a talk on embracing multilingualism and eradicating bias. There's some dense theory on languaging, this idea of what is languaging, bilingualism, and translanguaging, 2 chapters by Ophelia Garcia and Li Wei. Then there's some research, and then there's some practice articles for you to think about. So that's that. And then the last upload is a summary. So it's a little bit different. So this last one is thinking about embracing multilingualism as a broad foundation. Can you describe an instructional moment where you brought all 4 of these principles into a single instructional moment? So the first part of this rubric is sort of the multilingual view. How have you embraced a broad view of multilingualism as you worked through the principles? What principles were difficult? What were easier? And identify an instructional moment where all 4 came together, and describe it. And then going forward, what's the nature of the work that you and your group are going to be doing? And how do your identities and ideologies affect what you'll do and how you'll go about doing it? And then that will be the end where we answer the question, is the course complete? And I believe the answer will be yes. If you look at the right here, these lists of activities are here. The due dates are here, the 29th of January, February 12th, March 12th, April 2nd, and April 16th. Of course, those are flexible due dates, but they are meant to sort of align with the face-to-face meetings. You know, face-to-face meetings will be during that same week. These due dates are Fridays. So I'm going to stop there. I've been talking for a little bit. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week in our first face-to-face meetings for those of you who choose to attend. Welcome to the class. You're free to get started whenever you're ready. You can email me at any time with any questions you have. And again, happy Martin Luther King Day. Here's to a peaceful week coming up. And I will look forward to seeing all of you soon. Thank you.